All this is Dr. Mubin Sayed from drbeen.com. Welcome to one more show. So the discussion today is about the Novavax vaccines FDA briefing document that FDA made available before the tomorrow's committee meeting for approval or authorization. I'll tell you my immediate reaction. Number one, I think it's not a good thing that they did that. Secondly, looking at that document, to me, it seems like they'll get the authorization with a label on it. That's what I think. So, but that is just my opinion. Let's look at the data together. What I am really interested, and I'm not just saying it to you for no reason, I'm really interested in figuring out, what do you think? Is this a uniform behavior of FDA for all companies? Number one. Number two, if you are in Australia or UK like Maple Art, have you seen these data points that FDA has in this briefing document? And number three, I would like you to pay attention to something that is very interesting. I would show you what Novavax said about FDA's concerns, and I would like you to see how FDA put their concerns together. If I spill the beans, FDA collected data for more than the 301 study. That one study that Novavax has is 301. There are other studies, 302. There is study for adolescent expansion. FDA took all of that data and then said, hey, we have concerns. Novavax looked at, I believe, 301 and said, well, the myocarditis is comparable in both placebo and vaccinated group. So I would like you to catch that language difference between the two entities. So let's start. So these are our gifts for humanity. Quick references for the so this is drbeen.com. Then here, this is Novavax. So let's start with the Novavax statement. I would read it once more. This is June 3. Novavax statement on US FDA briefing document related to myocarditis, pericarditis. So they are saying throughout the pandemic, let me see if I can make it bigger. Yes. Throughout the pandemic, as publicly available vaccines have been administered, there have been numerous investigations into findings related to myocarditis. We have learned that we can expect to see natural background events of myocarditis in any sufficiently large database, and that young males are at higher risk of myocarditis is most often caused by non-specific viral infections. Then they say the data from our placebo-controlled studies show that overall, in our clinical development program, the rate of myocarditis was balanced. So note their language. They are saying it is balanced. The rate of myocarditis was balanced between the vaccine and the placebo arms, 0.007% and 0.005%. Furthermore, in the post-crossover portions of our studies, the cases we have seen are all within expected rate. This is their language. So they're saying our data shows it's balanced. Then they say, based on our interpretation of all the clinical data supporting Novavax vaccine, including over 50,000 participants in clinical trials, we believe there is insufficient evidence. I don't know why did they not choose the word to say there is not sufficient. They should have put the not in there to make it clear. Sometimes this insufficient, I actually read the insufficient as sufficient. And then I went back and I said, why would the company say sufficient? And I read that I missed the in with it. So there is insufficient evidence to establish a causal relationship. We will continue to monitor all adverse events, including myocarditis and pericarditis. Okay, so now catch one more thing before we look at the data. That is, FDA would tell you that we looked at 40,000 patients or persons. Novavax is telling you that they have 50,000 in this third paragraph. The studies that I'm going to show, the debrief document, the briefing document that FDA has published, that is also coming from FDA. That document actually shows that there were about 29,000 participants in 301 study. There are multiple studies. So now we are dancing between the numbers of 30,000 participants versus 40,000 participants versus 50,000 participants. This is what's happening. Okay, so please keep this in mind as we progress through the document. The question that we are all going to answer together, is it correct that there is myocarditis risk and neurological issue, pathology risk, and thromboembolism risk? And if there is any allergic reaction risk, that's one. And the second is, I want you to catch one more language from FDA, which I was surprised to see in their document. I'm going to put that language in front of you earlier as well. They said, and we will read the exact words, I'm going to paraphrase it. At one part in their document said, there are myocarditis occurring and we do not know the long-term outcome. It blew my mind that people had been screaming at the top of their lungs to say, hey, these vaccines may have things that would have long-term effects. And these folks were then labeled incorrectly and told that they are just fringe. And now all of a sudden, FDA themselves use the term, the expression, we do not know the long-term side effects. And I was amazed that how they played the same game. I think they are not too much in favor of this, but that is my opinion. And I have no idea. We'll find out tomorrow. I don't think that FDA themselves have much control over the committee. So I also think that committee would approve this vaccine and they would simply say, here is a label. With this, one more thing, my opinion is, after looking at this data, and I'll show it to you, I think this vaccine for men under 30 is not the right vaccine because it does cause myocarditis, and that myocarditis rate is high. So with this, let's start. So this is Novavax. This is the Novavax news about other things. And finally here, if somebody from Novavax is watching this, guys, Novavax, you should make your news more openly available. So you used to have the page where you can click and read the news. Now you have to download the news. Who's going to download the news to read it? And then there are some more references. I'll come to that later on. There is this as well. So of course, there is a financial outcome as well. So Novavax in 2019, early part of the 2019 or 2018, their stock used to be 37, 40-ish. Then in 2019, their stock fell to $4.6, $5 or even lesser. And then their stock went up, I think, for this vaccine. This is 2021. And it went up to 289. And the latest high number was 217 on December 17, 2021. So about 6 months ago. And today it is at 47. And it has been falling since FDA started offering their concerns. So with this, let's now look at the data. Please don't make any decisions based on this discussion over here. This is not an advice of financial sort or medical sort. This is really looking at the data together. And I have their debrief or briefing document here as well. And I would show you some parts of this documents as well. I have been reading it and marking it since the morning and trying to figure it out. So one more thing to keep in mind before we look at the document is, because we're going to talk about myocarditis in younger male adults, we should know the number. So the number, it just zipped past me over here. It is 10,000. I can tell you off the top of my head. I wanted to show you the reference itself. So here, this is table number 6, page number 20. It says demographics and other baseline characteristics. Male, 10,367. Females, 9,368. So total 19,735 in the vaccination side, and placebo side 9,847. This was a 2-to-1 ratio vaccination program. And so 2 times the vaccinated versus 1 time the placebo. Placebo was saline. So 10,367 males, including all age groups. The 4 cases of, so there were 6 cases of myocarditis in this vaccination group. Out of those 6, actually 40,000 people, because FDA went and found more cases from other studies too. So they say 40,000. So there were four cases in young males, 20 years and lesser. 2 cases of myocarditis in females above 60 years. I believe one was 60 and one was 67. 1 case of myocarditis in placebo, and I believe that was also a woman more than 60 years of age. So we'll look into those. So which tells me that prevalence of the cases was in men younger than or equal to 20. There is another thing that was interesting, which I did not see from FDA before, and that was FDA actually said that this is caused by vaccine. In the other briefing documents that we had been seeing, FDA would come out and say, we don't think it is caused by the vaccine. It seems so, or maybe not. But here, look at this. This is table number 20. In here, let's just look at this. After this table and looking at it, you can actually then stop this video and do something else. I'm going to go in details as well. So here, myocarditis and or pericarditis cases in order of time. There are total 7 cases, 6 in the vaccination group and 1 in placebo. So start here. Age 16 men, male, myocarditis, dose 2 days after the second dose. And if you see here, FDA opinion, this is the first time FDA actually released a document before the advisory committee with their opinion. FDA opinion, a concern for causal relationship. Causal, they're saying causal. They're standing behind their message there. Then 19 male, myocarditis after 2 days after second dose, and they say causal relationship. Then 28 male, 3 days after booster. So there was, I believe, dose 1 and 2 that were 21 days apart. There was a booster as well. And then a causal relationship to vaccine. Pericarditis, 60 female, 8 days after dose 2, causal relationship. 20 male, 10 days after dose 1. This male also had another illness, so history of sore throat and fever, 8 days prior to the event. So he also had sore throat, and we know that the sore throat or the infection strep can also cause cardiac event. So although temporally related to vaccine, so in time related to the first dose of vaccine, 10 days, ARF and non-rheumatic streptococcal myocarditis are also plausible alternative etiologies. So acute rheumatic fever or acute streptococcus can cause cardiac event as well. So they agree to that. Although usually at this age, mostly it doesn't happen, but that is a possibility because this patient did have sore throat a week ago. And normally sore throat related or streptococcal related cardiac events usually appear after a week or 2. So the times are kind of in that range as well. Then is the 67 male. Dose 1, 28 days after the dose one. So 28 days after dose one doesn't look very much like vaccine causing it. But this patient also had developed COVID. So FDA agrees that this may be COVID or something else. Then 31 female myocarditis in placebo group. And so long time to onset unrelated to placebo. So this is their um, data. Now, if I can give you a quick, if we take this data, if we say, remember, I read to you what Novavax said. Novavax said in our study, they are comparable, they're equal. So FDA then went out and let me read this to you. This part, this is page number 47. In summary, I had actually drawn all of this and I'm just reading it to you over here. In summary, the events of myocarditis pericarditis are concerning for a causal association with Novavax for the following reasons. Number one, 5 events were reported within 2 weeks of vaccination. And I agree, that is within the vaccination time. Number two, only one event had a clearly identified alternate etiology, and that was 67 years man with COVID. COVID strongly associated with myocarditis. Number three, 4 of the events occurred in young men, which is a known population to develop myocarditis. So I wanted to use this for a second. So 10,000 total men. I do not know exactly young men, what was their number. In this data, they have 2 age stratifications, 18 to 64 and 65 and above. So 18 to 20 or 30 is not available, at least not to me. They may have it in their data. They will have it in their data. So let's just take all the men, 10,000 men. Now, 10,000 men at least got 2 doses. You saw that one of them had a booster as well. And I don't have that data here. So I'm just going to consider 2 doses. That means 20,000 doses, right? So these 4 cases occurred in men. 10,000 men, 2 doses is 20,000 doses. If we do the rough math and we say how many 20,000 in 1 million, there are 50 20,000s in a million. And that means if you take 4 and multiply it with 50, that makes 200 cases in a million people or million doses. Now, the other cases with, for example, messenger RNA vaccines. Remember, there was a study that showed background rate of 0.5 cases in young adults over 1 million versus the Moderna messenger RNA was 70. So that was 133, 34 times higher. Here we are seeing 200 per million. So there is an increase that we can see. Now, the thing that worries me is that I do not have clarity because this data shows participant counts to be 29,000. Then if you see here, look at the second part of this highlighted one. Additionally, identification of multiple potential vaccine-associated cases in a pre-market safety database of 40,000 vaccine recipients raises concerns that if causally associated, the risk of myocarditis following Novavax could be higher than reported during post-authorization use of mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. So what they're saying is, we are seeing 40,000 people not before the authorization, and out of those 40,000 people, there are number of people who have myocarditis. And they're saying with the messenger RNA vaccines, we saw no myocarditis in the trial phases. And when they went out in production in market, there were cases. So here, if we are already seeing cases in the trial, then what will happen when we go out in the market? So the numbers are all over the place. 29,000 here, 10,000 men, out of which 4 developed this, 40,000 people analyzed by FDA. Then, if you go back to what Novavax was saying, Novavax said, hey, based on our interpretation of all the clinical data supporting Novavax, including over 50,000 participants in clinical trials, so they are using 50,000. So, as you can tell, there is, I think the best way to look at this will be to look at those countries that have already authorized it, for example, Australia, and then look at their data. And here is why I was angry in the beginning. I wanted to actually, before this discussion, go over Novavax's news to see which countries are authorized and go and see if I can find data from there. But their news cannot be read without downloading it. And I refused to download all those documents to see where my information may be. This is just the weirdest thing they did. Anyways, back here. Then the FDA goes into the other cardiac events as well, more than myocarditis, arrhythmias and hypertensions and other. So now let's go back once more to my, and I would try not to waste your time now because we have already talked for the majority. Quick refresher, it's a subprotein based vaccine, spikes. And that is why it is not going to be entering any other random cell. It will have to be picked up by the immune system cells. Matrix M is the adjuvant. It is already authorized in many countries. FDA advisory committee meeting is tomorrow. FDA has already given their opinion and concerns. I read to you this statement from Novavax. The study 301 that we are seeing, this is actually still an ongoing study. It is a randomized, observer-blind, placebo-controlled crossover study. September 27th, 2021, people crossed over from one side to the other. Placebo used was saline. 29,945 people. We looked at this. They started on December 27th, 2020. The enrollment completed on February 18, my birthday, 2021. 19,735 in the vaccine group, 9,847 in the placebo group. Dose 1 and dose 2, the distance between them is 21 days. 5 microgram of the spike protein material and 50 microgram of the matrix M. Age stratification, we discussed it before, 18 to 64 and 65. That is how they stratified. They wanted to make sure that 25% of the population is above 65 and above. Plus, they also tried to bring in as many folks with the high risk. So high risk communities were prioritized. Efficacy was overall 90.41%. So there were 17 cases of the COVID in 17,272 people who were followed up on the vaccine side. On the placebo side, out of 8,385, there were 79 cases. Clearly, there is a difference. So 0.098% was the case rate on the vaccinated side, and 0.942% was the case rate on the placebo side. 18 to 64, there were 15 cases out of 15,220, or 0.099%. And in 18 to 64 on the placebo side, it was 1.01. So efficacy there in 18 to 64, 91%. Efficacy greater than 65 and above, as efficacy was actually lower, 78.63%. 75 and above, 100%, but that number was in, I think, 300 total. So 75 plus, the efficacy was 100%, but the count was really small. Now we looked at this myocarditis, and I wanted to read to you this one part, which I did not see these authorities ever acknowledging, even. And people who were talking about long term outcomes, they were shunned. And look at this. Available data from short term follow up suggests that most individuals have had resolution of symptoms, so they became better. We agree with that. Although information is not yet available about potential long term sequelae. How about that? Have you read this kind of a statement with any other vaccine data? If you have, please tell me. I may have missed it. So, FDA said of particular interest, this is their page 44. Of particular interest were events of myocarditis and pericarditis. Post marketing data from the individuals receiving messenger RNA vaccines have demonstrated. So, we read that, right? This was very interesting, the blue part. And they said the spike protein antigen can induce antibodies to SARS CoV 2 spike glycoprotein that cross react with myocardial contractile proteins, including myocardial alpha myosin heavy chain. This is not new to us. We know that antibodies have been or immune reactions are a possibility for vascular and cardiac damage. Then the table that I showed you in the beginning, table number 20, where there are total 6 cases on the vaccine side, 1 on the placebo side. We went over those as well. 4 caused by vaccine, according to FDA, 2 possibly vaccine or something else. Then I read this to you already, so we're good. Now we're going to move on from cardiac. And if you are someone who is interested in knowing more, after the myocarditis, the FDA briefing documents then talk about other cardiac events that happened as well. For example, arrhythmias and other such things. So if you see here, acute infarction, angina pectoris, coronary artery disease, myocardial infarction, acute coronary syndrome, coronary artery occlusion, stress cardiomyopathy, ischemic heart cardiomyopathy. So they have them all over here. So if you see, for example, remember the number of persons were double on the vaccine side compared to placebo. So if you see the number of the cases as double, then that is still equal because the number are double over here. For example, if you see number of cases 15 cardiac events in the vaccine side and 77 on the placebo side, that is equal, 0.1% on both sides. And similarly, if you continue to go down, acute myocardial infarction, 2 on the vaccine side and 4 on the placebo. So actually placebo had more. So you can look at that. Plus, you can read some more over here where they go one topic at a time and discuss the situation. For example, in the post crossover period through September 27, a total of 53 out of 21,714 or 0.2% participants who received Novavax either in the pre or post crossover period experienced adverse events in the SOC cardiac disorders. Symptoms of the 61 events, 40 were serious, including 3 fatal events, 1 event each of cardiac arrest and myocardial infarction, and 1 event of alcoholic cardiomyopathy. The time to onset of the fatal event from the most recent Novavax dose was 8 days for an event of cardiac arrest and more than 80 days for the remaining events. So they have actually gone in this kind of detail to provide more information. So here, additional data provided at FDA's request in a dataset with a cutoff date of February 17, 2022 was used to assess additional accrued adverse events of cardiac events in the post crossover period. So crossover occurred on September 27, 2021. So some people who were in placebo came to the vaccinated side, meaning they were vaccinated, and then some from the vaccine went to placebo side. An imbalance in the proportion of participants was observed for the term of acute myocardial infarction, heart attack. N equals 6 over 6, 146, or 0.09% in participants crossed over to Novavax, and N equals 4, 0.03% in crossover to placebo. So those who crossed over and received the Novavax, 0.09% developed heart attacks. Those who crossed over and received placebo, 0.03% had heart attacks and coronary artery diseases. So once again, coronary artery disease, 0.08% for Novavax and 0.01% for placebo. So that's a huge difference, at least in terms of percentages. In aggregate, terms associated with myocardial infarction were reported by 18 by 6, 146, so 0.3% participants who crossed over to receive Novavax compared to 0.1% of participants who crossed over to receive placebo. So they have more data in here. So then they say, in summary, numerical imbalances were noted between the treatment arms with respect to events of cardiac failure and cardiomyopathy, including some events in close temporal proximity to vaccination, so close time. Cardiac events, including fatal events of cardiac arrest and myocardial infarction, were reported with close temporal relationship to Novavax vaccine. However, the proportion of participants with fatal, serious, and ischemic cardiac events were generally balanced across the treatment arms for the blinded pre-crossover period with comparable times. So before crossover, they seemed to be comparable. After crossover, there was an imbalance. Anaphylactic reaction. So let's just quickly go over these. Allergic reaction, no issues, at least according to the data. So 0.01% developed allergic reactions on the vaccine side, 0.02% developed allergic reactions on placebo side. Nervous system issues or neurological issues. This is interesting. Stroke-like events or symptoms, signs and symptoms that were stroke-like. 0.06% on the vaccination side and 0.02% on placebo side. So there is an imbalance. 11 strokes or stroke-like syndromes or stroke-like clinical presentation, 11 out of 19,000, and here 2 out of 9,000. I'm rounding the numbers. So there is a imbalance in these strokes. After crossover, the stroke count was higher in placebo. Then Guillain-Barré syndrome, 0.2% on the vaccine side, 0.3 on the placebo side pre-crossover, 0.2% on the vaccine and 0.3 on the placebo post-crossover. So equal, so balanced. Then thrombotic events. Pre-crossover on the vaccine side, 0.14% events that looked like thromboembolism, and placebo had 0.16%. Deaths. 11 deaths on the Novavax vaccine side, 5 deaths in the placebo side. So once again, vaccine number or people getting vaccination were double compared to placebo. So percentage is the same, 0.1%. So this is page 58. I have the page numbers here. 4 had clear etiology. So this is interesting that even after this 0.1% on both sides, FDA actually goes out and says, out of these 11, 4 had clear etiologies, and then there are some doubts on the other. So if you go to page 59, This is page 59. So what they do is, if you see here, of the 11 deaths in the Novavax arm, 4 had a clear alternative etiology, including toxicity to various agents, cocaine, fentanyl, heroin intoxication, accidental overdose, alcohol and prescription drugs, gunshot wound to the head and septic shock, pneumonia, and blood culture positive to streptococcus. The remaining 7 are here. So, remaining 7. So, do you see the verbiage? 4 had a clear alternative etiology. What does that invoke in your head? 7 did not have a clear alternate etiology. Now let's look at them. 75-year-old female with a history of hypertension experienced a fatal cardiovascular accident 48 days following the second dose. Although no clear alternative etiology is identified for this CVA, this participant had several risk factors for CVA, including her age and a history of hypertension. So they say we don't see any other reason than to say if it is not vaccine, then it is her age and the history of hypertension. The temporal distance, the time distance from the most recent vaccination, more than 45 days ago, make a causative association with Novavax unlikely. And the sponsor and investigator's assessment that the CV is not related is reasonable. So they didn't actually put it over here because they said over here the wording is clear alternative. So then these things did not fall in clear. Then here, a total of 5 cardiac arrests were reported, 0.03% of participants. The time to onset for each of them were 12 and 58 days following the most recent. Fatal adverse events of cardiac arrest were reported 12 and 21 days after the first Novavax vaccine. 12 to 21 days after the first dose of Novavax in a 44-year-old female and a 66-year-old male, respectively, both of whom were found pulseless and unable to be resuscitated. The 3 remaining fatal events of cardiac arrest occurred 23 days, 40 days, and 58 days post second dose in participants 39, 50, and 45 years of age. These are young ages. No autopsy data were available for any of these participants. Of the 5 participants with fatal cardiac arrests, 4 had comorbidities as well as histories of substance use, including cocaine, meth, alcohol, and 1 death was attributed to overdose. So then they say, at this time, there is insufficient information to assess for causality to Novavax vaccine, and FDA's assessment vaccination cannot be definitively excluded as a contributory factor. So for these, FDA says we can't say this was not the vaccine. Then they say there were 3 similar events of cardiac arrest on day 6, 8, and 14 post dose 1 in the placebo arm, 0.03%, which suggests that the cases in the Novavax arm may reflect background rates of the cardiac arrest in the study population unrelated to vaccination. This whole thing was treated differently in other documents. In other documents, they simply said a similar count was seen in placebo. It seems to be balanced. Here, they provided all this information. They created a lot of concern. And then they said, maybe this is the same for everyone in placebo versus Novavax. Because if you see here, a total of 5 cardiac arrests were reported, 0.03% of the participants. Then they say in the placebo, there were 3 similar events of cardiac arrest, which is also 0.03%. So anyways, this document made me very confused about what to think about the vaccine. And I had to continuously remind myself that there are other countries that have approved or authorized it. We should look at the data there as well. A 79-year-old female with a history of hypertension, hyperlipidemia, sleep apnea, and obesity, BMI 43, experienced a fatal myocardial infarction, 79 years, 64 days following the second dose. This participant's age and comorbidities are significant risk factor for myocardial infarction. In the context of these risk factors and temporal distance, time distance from vaccination, more than 2 months, the sponsor and investigator's assessment that the event is not related is reasonable. So then they say, in summary, there are no deaths that appear to be clearly causally related to vaccine. Fatal events were generally balanced across the treatment arms with respect to time to onset and number of cardiac related events. However, the lack of autopsy information for multiple fatal events of cardiac arrest following Novavax limits assessment of causality. So, what do you think with these? Um, how does it make you feel about this vaccine? We are reading a document. I'm not adding any or removing anything from here. How does it make you feel? So then there are serious side effects and serious events. I'll just read one or two and then we'll stop. The most common serious adverse effects occurring at higher rates in the Novavax arm than placebo arm were cerebrovascular accidents and cholecystitis, the gallbladder side. Acute 0.04% in vaccine and 0 in placebo. So 7 cases in vaccine and 0 in placebo of cholecystitis. Atrial fibrillation, 0.04% in vaccine, 8 cases versus 2 cases in placebo. And pneumonia, aspiration, and spontaneous abortion, 0.0% in vaccine, 4 cases versus 0 cases in placebo. So spontaneous abortion is what they brought up here as well. The small number of cases of spontaneous abortion and pneumonia aspiration do not suggest a causal relationship. The most common serious adverse effect occurring at higher rates in placebo arm than the Novavax arm was pneumonia, COVID, and suicidal ideation. A total of 5 participants in the Novavax arm, 0.03%, and 3 in the placebo, 0.03%, experienced severe adverse events that were considered related by the investigators. So then they have a discussion of those events as well, as you can see here. So this is the discussion. I wanted to make sure that we go over the myocarditis discussion today and try to understand what they're saying. From the data, it does seem like if you extrapolate it, it is a higher number. What is missing for me yet is to compare it to the other countries. I actually tried to go to Australia's official site. Here. However, in this Australian government Novavax vaccine, rare side effects. So I went there. Rare side effects after the Novavax vaccines are severe allergic reactions, which in this data that you saw from FDA says balanced. Some COVID-19 vaccines have been linked with the rare side effect of myocarditis and pericarditis. The risk after the Novavax vaccine is not yet known. A small number of cases of myocarditis were reported in the clinical trial, though it is not yet known if these were caused by vaccine. So this is Australia saying. Here you can see clearly FDA saying 4 cases, 28 years and younger, out of 10,000 men, 20,000 doses, are Novavax. They said in their document caused by. Here, Australia is saying though it is not yet known if these were caused by vaccine. The TGA and the Australian Technical Advisory Group on Immunization are monitoring the safety of vaccine. Find out more about myocarditis and pericarditis. So I thought they would have the data here, but that's not the data. It's just the definition of what these diseases are. Then I thought the risk and benefits, so maybe they would have the risk and benefits, but actually risks and benefits, they only write the benefits of vaccinations, with Novavax greatly outweigh the risk of side effects. So I think that this is not the best way to handle the data. Meeple Art is here, so we'll ask Meeple Art for where to find the Australian data. Australia is not a police state. The media blew up a few protesters. Okay. So this is the discussion. Thank you very much for your time, your attention. What I am really sincerely am curious, because I told you this document made me confused. So what is your experience? What is your knowledge? What data have you seen? What do you feel about this situation? And please do me a favor. Please like, subscribe, and share. In the description of this video, there are links. If you would like to buy Drbeen plan, that is a one-time lifetime payment, lesser than $100, and you get access to, so you have access to all of these on YouTube, plus you have another 800 videos on drbeen.com. So that supports my work, that supports my team, plus that gives you access to 800 videos. So see if you wanted to do that. There is also a link to use for PayPal to support this work. There is a buy me a coffee to support this work. You can become a patron as well. You can have Substack too. And now you can even join this YouTube channel as well and become a member. So with this, I would see you on the Chit Chat channel briefly for 5-10 minutes to plan for the Chit Chat channel. So thank you very much and bye for now.